What's up, guys? It's Patrick Foley, aka Patrick4D. We're back with another tutorial, official tutorial number 2. Yeah, the last one was about a month ago. I can't believe the overwhelming support. It's over 15,000 views right now. It was even posted. So humbled by it. I can't believe it. So it's only right that I made another one for you guys who've been following me since day one. Most of you guys. I shouldn't say most of you guys. That wouldn't make sense. But either way, I really appreciate any of you guys who have been supporting me at all. So let's just get right into it. I'm at R18 right now, finally upgraded. And if you'll notice, my layout is way different than yours probably is. It really doesn't matter. I know people have been asking me to share the layout, and I probably will when I get some time. But just so you know, it really doesn't matter where it is. I'll explain what everything does in a second. But just some highlights. We'll be going through some subsurface scattering. That's the main one. Some cool organic scratch textures, or just things to make your model look more organic when you start shading it. A little bit of X particles. I know I said I wouldn't go into third-party plugins or whatever, but the purpose of this tutorial has nothing to do with X particles. Actually, it's just if you have it, great, you can follow along. But if not, you can also follow along once we get to the shading part. But either way, it'll be kind of cool to look at, and then we'll go through a little bit of dynamics with some simulation tags at the end. So let's get into it. So as you see, I got a camera set up in portrait mode. What I'm going to do is turn off depth of field. I already have a bunch of things set up here, which I'll just kind of redo for you guys. Global illumination, pretty much the same settings I'm going back to from the first tutorial. So if you don't know what I'm doing here, just go to the first tutorial. You're going to set this at 20 samples, so it'll render faster. Output, let's go to 600 by 600 instead of 1080. Looks good. And then from fixed to progressive, and set all of these values to 2. Alright, so that looks good. So let's start making this thing. What I'm going to do is open up an emitter for X Particles users. It'll be right here. You should know that. And what you'll do from there, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And in the attributes manager, I will go to object, from rectangle to sphere. So now these things will be coming out everywhere. But not only that, we're going to go to the emission and change this from rate to shot. So instead of it coming out infinitely, it's just going to shoot out 1,000 particles and be done. So that it looks good. Let's take the speed to about 30 centimeters, so it'll come out much slower. That's what we want. And then what we can do after that is grab a skinner. So X particle skinner, what that'll do is give us some geometry applied to these particles. And let's see, let's grab the emitter and drag it right in there. So now you got this big meatball thing coming out. So at least we see something. So let's see here. Let's set this back to the beginning. We don't want the meatball. We want, to give this some kind of abstract flow, for lack of a better word. So let's take this thing and low poly. So now at least we have some higher quality mesh going on here. And if you want, you can set this thing to constant lines. You can see I prefer this view a little bit. So let's go to what do we need? We need a turbulence modifier. So if you go to X Particles Modifiers, Motion, XP Turbulence, and you must have the XP emitter or the emitter selected. That way it automatically is applied. So Motion, turns that. Now when we play this thing. Oops, let me play it from here. Now when we play this thing, you see it's not like perfect sphere anymore. It's kind of going wherever we want this thing to go, or it's kind of like controlled by the wind or turbulence. And so what we want to do next is actually turn off the skinner, because that slows it down when we're trying to preview what's going on, so you can see much clearer what's going on there. And we're going to change the noise type to curl. Take the frequency down to 0, take the scale to about 28%, and the strength to like 7. So now, see what's going on. A ton of random stuff here, but it does look really abstract. So once we apply shape, so this kind of gets me there faster. So once we have that, I'm happy with it. I actually want to go and zoom into this a little bit. So with the camera, have something we're comfortable with, we can go into the smoothing. It really doesn't matter what order you do this, and click geometry, and that gives us more of a fluidy look. If you like that look more, by all means go with it. Once we've selected the Skinner, and that kind of flattens it for us, we got our own little shape now. You can delete turbulence, you can delete the emitter. So next thing is the shading. I'm going to show you guys a little bit about subsurface scattering. It really adds a ton of detail that you can't really achieve with any other technique. For instance, if you want to make something look waxy, because it's not transparent really, it's just kind of like irradiating light from the inside, just like a candle. So the way to do that is, oops, one second. Sorry. The way to do that is simply to let's start with a shader. Let's add a little shader here, and let's go kind of move this out. It's an easy way to add some cool softbox lights if you're used to photography. And if we activate the interactive render region, we can see, instantly it adds this kind of like cinematic looking light. You can move it wherever you want. But for this, I'll just use a plane. It'll be easier for you guys. So if you hop into this view, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to create a plane. And from the plane, like 70 degrees, and just bump it out this way. Add a little light to it. And then, I think what we'd want to do is, if you go to the top, let's shrink this down a little bit. If you go back to this view, oops. Let's hop out of the camera for a second. This is the camera. I usually just make it invisible. It's easier to see things. But now I can go here and adjust where I want this light. So, you got to kind of just think realistically here where you want this light to be placed. You can take the segments down to 1 by 1 because we really has nothing to do with the segments. We don't need that many segments. And maybe move this somewhere kind of like here. Rotate. Now we can see in proportion to where this thing is, and I'm happy with that. Doesn't look too bad. Maybe increase the size a little bit, as long as it's not affecting our window here. So if we hop back into the camera view, let's apply, we can delete all this stuff. Let's apply this shader we created to the plane, and we can rename this light. And once we got that set up, we're going to just kill the color, kill the reflectance, and apply luminance to it. And you can see already it's starting to give it some light. So what we're going to do first is go to Illumination, click GI, the scattering of the light, so there's not as much of a chance that you'll get splotches all over the place. And let's take this up to about 250. I'm rarely ever satisfied with brightness of 100%. Seems like 100% brightness is crazy, but it's really not. So you can see already, bumping this to 250 looks much better. But if you notice, this whole thing here, it's like, the parts it's hitting, the parts the light is hitting, you can see, obviously, and then it kind of fades into the shadow. And you can tell what's going on here by the way, because it's 3D and you can tell the light's hitting it, but you'll really be able to tell what's going on once we add subsurface scattering. So that'll be our first thing. So if you want to create a new material and drag it to our little abstract thing here, it automatically turns it white. But we can kill the color, and you can leave the reflectance on. You can't see anything because there's no color, it's too dark. So we're going to turn on luminance, and automatically that even looks cool. It looks like milk or something. It's giving off light. But we want to go to the texture, go to effects, and bring this down to subsurface scattering. So automatically you'll be able to see, check it out, the whole thing's kind of being illuminated, but it's not like giving off light like it was before. And so a little bit about this, when you click this, it brings you up to a little, some menus, some presets, cool. Path lengths, stuff like that. The path length is how many centimeters the light will travel into this thing before it starts to die. And 10 centimeters is actually a decent amount, and you'll notice the lower this number, the longer it takes to render, because it's just more of a fine calculation that has to make for the light to bounce and kill inside of this thing versus, something like this where the whole thing's pretty much irradiated. So if you take this down to like 5, you can see that it got a little bit darker towards the ends, that it was not, that the light's not hitting it. And I'll take the light and actually make it a little bit smaller, so it's less, less of the light is hitting this thing. So now if you go back into this view, and here's where you want to mess with the strength. Just like the luminance channel with the light being at 250, I'm rarely satisfied with the subsurface scattering being at 100%. So I usually bump this to like 250 to start. And if you can see, the whole thing just gets nice and bright. Looks good to me. Let's go 450. And there's definitely a level where it's like, all right, you're adding too much. And with adding this, you might want to take this down to like 3. So you can see this thing's getting a little more depth to it, and it's not as, it's not like the whole thing's just grayed out like before. And this is where, like, if you were making a candle, this is where you would change the color here. And if you want to be really defined, you can change the color by the color channels here. But if you were looking for like a candle, you'd go maybe like a yellowish orange and drag this up a little bit. But you can see already, the darker parts have more of a saturated color and the lighter parts have a less saturated color, just like a candle is. So you could drag that as far up as you wanted. You could get this thing looking real gross or whatever. A lot of times I use, something like this with a really high color. And that looks just like something you can't create really any other way besides subsurface scattering, at least that I know. But I think that looks really sweet like that. Color-wise, I guess it really doesn't matter. And this is where you could also, once you start adding reflectance stuff, you changing this thing dramatically by every step you do. So if you, let's kill the specular, drag this down to like 9. And so you can start, now it's like this like wet, like fluidy thing with subsurface scattering. So this thing already looks pretty sweet, which brings us to our next part of this thing. Let's go through some dynamics. We just covered subsurface scattering, and a little bit of X particles, and not to mention there's actually way more things you can do with the subsurface scattering here that I won't go through now, because 90% of the time I'm satisfied with just these steps. But there's different effects that you can look up how they work with bouncing the light and render times and making it a little more practical. But I usually just go with the shader. So that pretty much covers that. Let's go to let's put some dynamics on this thing. So as we can see, we got this, and I'd be satisfied with this for the most part. But just like every render has to have, it's got to have spheres. So for the sake of this tutorial, I will start off with that. So I'm going to create a sphere, nice little sphere here. Probably just change the segment type to icosahedron for the hell of it, and drag that into a cloner. So I'd go to MoGraph, cloner, and drag it right into the cloner. And once I have the cloner, I'm going to click Render Instances. And let's go to what I want to go to. I wanted to do that dynamics, so I guess let's try first with the grid array. That usually works pretty well. And once we have something like this, let's take these down and up. And if we go to the sphere, the original sphere that's inside of the cloner, and we click tags, let's go to simulation tag, Rigidbody. And what that'll do is pretty much tell Cinema4D that these are actual physical objects that we want to be applied by real life physics and everything. So if we press play, they just drop. and you'll notice they drop through the object we created before because we didn't tell Cinema4D that we want it to be applied by, gravity and all that stuff, and to be a physical object. So what we want to do is go to the skinner that we have, go to Tags, Simulation, and Collider Body. So what that'll do is it actually won't make it fall. It'll just make it, a piece of like architecture almost that we want to be colliding with the things that have the dynamics body tag on it. So if we click play, they all hit it. And if you see, it's finally hitting this thing, but that's very basic and that's probably not what we want. So what we want to do is create an attractor. And for that, we'd literally just have to go to Simulate. Let's go exactly in the middle of the screen. And what that'll do is pretty much what you think it'll do. It'll make everything kind of attract to this object. And by default, probably nothing will happen because it's not attracting at a great enough level. So let's take the strength of the attractor to like 2000. So already, you'll notice that it's almost like there's a force field around this thing. And that's because there's something we have to do within the dynamics tag that's on top of this skinner. But it's, that's cool if that's what you want. But if you want it to actually be interacting correctly with this thing, you're going to click the tag on the skinner and go to Collision. And then in the shape, go to Mode Dynamics. And now I'm pretty sure, that'll work perfectly. So it's actually going through all the nooks and crannies, but it's hitting the attractor. And if you don't have anything kind of shielding the attractor and you let an object just literally go through an attractor, it's just going to shoot out because it's just too much force going on here for it. So I think what will help if you just increase the size of this thing. And that does help a little bit. What we can do is create just a little kind of force field around this thing that won't be shown, but we'll give this a little simulation collider tag. So yeah, that works like that. And then if you just make it invisible, you don't have to worry about these things. Now that we have this basic thing set up, let's go to the count. Let's go 6 by 6 by 6. And we're getting this like cool, it's abstract, so we don't have to have any goal of what we're making here. But I'd say let's add a few more and then we'll be good. Let's go to the sphere. With the sphere, actually, you can take the segments down to like 12 because we really don't, it's not really about, these are very simple spheres, and when we have render perfect set on, we're just saving render time. So let's go back to the cloner and let's go to, 6 by 6 by 6. Let's go 8 by 8 by 8. And then we should see we got a shit ton of these things just like floating over this thing. And once we're happy with that, let's see. Trying to think of the best way to possibly do this. We can take a, let's just randomize, let me see, I had another way I wanted to do this. Well, either way, I guess we can cover two things in this tutorial. That is how you can make things interact and collide with objects. If you're happy with that, that's perfect. But what I want to do actually is, okay, so let's go back and change this whole thing. So I don't think we're going to need the tags anymore, so let's delete that. I'm kind of taking a step backwards here because I thought of another thing that I want to do, but either way, that's teaching you guys more stuff. So what we're going to do here is take the cloner. You can kill the attractor. We don't need that anymore. Take the cloner, go to Object, and we're going to drag the skinner in here. And you can see that now all of the balls are, there's a ball for every vertex of this thing. So that's where taking these segments down really helps. So let's take the radius of this thing to like 3, just so we can see what's going on here. Maybe 2, 1. All right, so we're starting to get some space here. This is a better view where you can see everything that's going on here. And you can see that it's actually rendering pretty nicely. So let's go to the cloner and add a shader effector. And this is really cool for making certain patterns within, replicating cloner objects. So for instance, if you have to have the cloner selected while you enable or click the shader, and then it'll be active. Or you can just click effectors and drag the shader on here. But shader, you're gonna go to shading, and then all you gotta do is drop like a simple noise in for the most part. Make this thing like 500 to start, and that'll pretty much, I'll show you in a second what that's actually doing. Once you go to the parameters and the scale, it's already set on uniform scale. So what we're doing is now you can see pretty cool patterns of this thing starting to fill up. So if you go to like minus 2.5, you can see like little tiny growths growing on this thing, which is pretty cool. At least that's how I see these things. And I'm pretty sure if you go to the cloner and go transform and take the Z scale, everything kind of busts in their own direction, which is kind of what I was going for in the first place. So now they're not actually on top of each other. They're kind of just swarming this thing, which I think is a very cool look. And that looks cool, and now we just got to give them a texture. Let's go apply just a random texture to the sphere. And I'm not exactly sure at all what I want this thing to be. I'm going to kill the color channel and make it kind of reflectance. I'm going to give it a reflectance and maybe add like a rose gold texture to this thing. Might be kind of cool. And that's pretty cool to me. That looks pretty decent. I kind of got to see what it looks like close up. So let's go drag this thing to like right here or something, see how it looks. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. And it's your choice to add noises or textures to that. These are so small that for me, I don't even think they necessarily need any bump or anything. And that's one thing I didn't add to any of this bump. So if you want to take that extra detail and add bump, that's by all means do it. I'm going to add the depth of field right now. So if I go back into this, actually what I'm going to do is go to the camera, enable depth of field back on, click the focus point by clicking this little mouse thing, and just clicking at a point where I think I want this thing to focus at. So that looks good right there. Let's see what we got. Maybe drag this up a little more so we can see. Alright, so that actually looks decent. So you can see certain parts are in focus, certain parts are not. And we're getting a lot of I don't even think I'm going to add a background. I think I'm going to keep it with a black background. Nothing there. Definitely is good enough for me. So yeah, that looks sweet. You can definitely see the depth of field. You can see these like little microscopic little ball things just chilling there. And I'm actually pretty happy with this. I was going to, let's see, how long has this been so far? I don't know if I can check. Yeah, I don't know how to check how long this tutorial has been so far. But I guess I'll save the next stuff for another tutorial. I'll try to make one sooner than I made last time. Once a month is definitely okay for me. But yeah, depending how well this one does, I'll upload another one. If you guys still really like these. The next one I'll probably be going over floor textures and adding smoke to the renders in Photoshop and in Cinema4D. And I'll try to think of some other things to show you guys. But that seems to be good right now. I'm going to finalize the render settings. Let's go 1080 by 1080. Let's go to the physical. Let's go back to fixed on high. Let's take these all to 4. At least these are the settings I use. And take this to 150, the sample count. And that should be good. I feel like I went a little bit faster in this tutorial than my last one. Please tell me if you think I went too fast. I know you guys really liked the last one, and I really appreciate the feedback. And really, all you guys, we're at 15,000 followers now, which is insane. That's technically why I'm making this video. So 15,000 on YouTube, or on Instagram. And I think since the last tutorial, I gained like 1,300 subscribers, which is insane. So 1,300 in the month. I really appreciate it. I got a lot of things coming, a lot of collabs coming, a lot of branded content stuff, and I'm just really excited. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me through these tutorials. I've never been formally trained in Cinema4D. A lot of people have asked me if I'm like a professor, if I teach at a school, and hell no, I'm definitely not. But I'm humbled that you guys think that I could be. So yeah, I appreciate it. So until next time, guys, take it easy.